just a little bit about us. We kind of design brand identities and digital experiences, and we work with like a range of clients from like small startups to scale ups to like really established brands like Dave. So a real kind of mix of clients, but essentially with something in common, that they want to really shake up the category that they operate in. Today, obviously, we're going to talk through the Dave work, as Chris says, and I haven't introduced us. I've just kind of launched straight into us. Let me just stop for 1 second. We'll kind of talk through the Dave work. I thought it was interesting to maybe talk about the fact that we actually pitched for Dave, and show you some of the stuff that we did there. Then do a bit of the process and behind the scenes, and then actually where we've landed with the final project. And then obviously if you've got any questions. As I should have said at the beginning, my name is Johanna. I'm the creative director at Output, and
I'm the brand design director at Output.
Cool. So we work together on the majority of the projects that come through the studio. We've got a team to support us and work with, both from a brand perspective and a digital. The Dave work is obviously much more focused within the kind of the brand world. So first off, I just thought, it was interesting just to kind of talk about the fact that we as design agencies still have to kind of pitch for work. It's not necessarily something that just comes straight to us. I think the times have changed where we don't necessarily have to do full creative pitches, but we like to kind of shake things up sometimes. And I guess as designers, we can get excited about a challenge as well, and want to kind of work through those. So kind of Dave came to us with the landscape that they operated in, and essentially a core problem. So for everyone that's familiar with kind of the old world of Dave, it was very much kind of perceived as like male dominated. Like people thought of it as like Jeremy Clarkson reruns and lots of kind of quite stagnant content, very kind of laddish, blokey chat, and very kind of dark kind of world that was being created as well. I think they kind of had it initially as this kind of like a gastro pub, or this kind of almost like a members lounge with all these kind of heritage kind of textures and panels. And they really wanted to kind of shake that up and kind of reflect the content essentially that they were creating today. And essentially when we're looking at pitches, as I say, we'll kind of get a little bit excited about the challenges, but we'll kind of break down those into like 3 areas that we might want to kind of just bring to life and have them as like thought starters and questions for the client. So in the pitch, they had this idea that they like Dave is essentially the mate that helps you through the messiness of life. Like we've come out of COVID, we need to kind of maybe be a little bit more lighthearted. We can all remember that news presenter that had his child kind of running on in the background when in his house. And like, how can you kind of embrace some of that like philosophy of like celebrating the mistakes of the everyday, finding humor in really unexpected places? So we'll kind of scamp out some ideas. So this is an example of what we were doing for Dave, like playing with this idea of like, is there a mistake with how things are kind of set? Do we crop things in awkward ways? Is it almost like you've got kind of creative that's coming through like your OSP or your next up, but it's just got stuck on the way in? Is there something that we can play with typography, where you kind of celebrate this moment of like the narrator, like that kind of voice that you hear that's telling you what's on next, but they're being disrupted by the fact that the doorbell's going, or they're thinking about something else, and you can kind of bring that to life in a visual way. We can play as well with this idea of like everyday motion in those instances. Like could the movement actually be more like you have on like an OHP, where it just feels like one big thing kind of moving up? There's like we've abandoned slickness and we're just embracing kind of flaws. Or could we kind of celebrate those like little bits of humor that we find in the everyday, like the things that we share and find funny across the internet, or these little light-hearted moments, the kind of the behind the scenes of the brand as well. We also wanted to kind of have this conversation about like, what does funny look like now? If funny was this kind of gastro pub or like a gentleman lounge, what would that be like now in today? Is it more about these conversations happening through kind of something like WhatsApp? If you kind of imagine Dave sitting on the sofa and having a conversation with you, how might that play out? Is it an area where talent can really like be harnessed and they have conversations and like almost kind of rip each other or have a little bit of kind of fun talking to each other that we can kind of all see? Or is it just a way in which we create this kind of arena that is recognizable as kind of conversation? And we quite liked the idea that you could kind of really lean into this. You could kind of have textures that were relating to different presenters. So like James Acaster's kind of jumpers and things like that, and having those as like, in the same way you might have WhatsApp textures in the background of your phone, could we really lean into that kind of philosophy? Or could we play with different formats and have things contained within text message formats and voice files and things like that? So again, you're kind of playing into this new arena for conversation. Or even is it that Dave's just having a conversation and at the kind of the breaks in between shows, is he just like, oh, I've gone, like you get that like ... where you're waiting for someone to reply and it just never comes, and you're just kind of sitting there waiting for it, and it's kind of returned to you afterwards that he's gone away and he's made his cup of tea. And the last one we really wanted to play was with this idea of like, they don't want to just be a broadcaster, they want to be equal with their viewers, they want to kind of really harness this power of conversation. And they wanted to do it in a kind of unconventional way. Like Dave was the original disruptor. They called themselves Dave so that they would stand out and be different across all the other channels, which are obviously leveraging numbers, and to kind of have a bit more of a kind of a personality behind themselves. So kind of playing with that idea, we explored ways in which we could potentially have much more of a free-form kind of look and feel, something that almost was like a zine or a magazine, where maybe Dave is like different typefaces all the time. It's not one consistent look and feel. You kind of embrace those mistakes. You kind of play with kind of textures and typefaces and layouts that just feel like they're not conventional. They're of the kind of the people. And it could even be that, say, Dave is got, instead of one kind of mark that kind of is retained across everything, it's something that's just constantly changing depending on the mood of the content, or the mood of the day, or the time of year, or something like that as well. So that's essentially kind of what we did through the kind of the pitch process. We presented the Dave team with these kind of questions, and it's a really great way to kind of forge debate and kind of just have a conversation, rather than us like presenting like finished visuals, or in any way thinking that they're locked into one look and feel. There's obviously only so much we know at that stage, but that essentially got us the work, where we were then super excited to kind of start the project and really kind of build on that same kind of philosophy, some of which you'll see has kind of made its way through different stages, and others were just so far out because we hadn't done our normal process and strategy or anything like that. But that takes us through to the live project, and I'll hand over to Mark and kind of chip in every now and again as we kind of remember some of the things that we did. As a project goes, it's been out for a few months, but it's a good 6 months before then that we first started these ideas.
Sweet. Cool. So yeah, with Dave, we usually do the strategy, but we were actually given the strategy here, but it was really, really good, and it was a great jump off point for us to start creating with. So yeah, they came to us with the idea of the new sort of brand promise was a fresh fix of funny, but where it started to get really interesting and nuanced was they were looking at Dave as being this almost the antidote to the chaos that is modern life, that what is going on in the world at this moment, well, then as well, a year ago too, just felt very relevant, and Dave just almost being the response to almost your way out of that a little bit. And then almost, yeah, pitching it as being Dave is the sort of friend who's helping you through. So we gave them sort of, as part of our process, we worked with a sort of brand character, and what we defined for them was irreverent, sharp, and empathetic, and you'll start to see how that comes to life in different ways. But yeah, we were sort of given the strategy here to build on, and we sort of created a creative platform to then build on top of this. So, and then as part of what we're going to go through today, we're really going to show you the proper behind the scenes, you know, the guts and all. It's going to be, we're going to show just everything we did really, because we work very iteratively and sort of very quickly, and I think that kind of comes across in some of the way we're going to talk about what we're showing now, because you'll see lots of it's very rough. But it helps us get to answers quickly and then keep developing and working collaboratively with the Dave team. So as part of our process, we kick off with creative exploration. So this is where we would usually pitch the business or the brand for 3 or 4 very different directions, where we actually imagine them as being something completely different each time. So for Dave, we looked at them in a few different ways. This first one was look at them as almost like an entertainer. It's like the host. Like, how can we build on this sense of hype and anticipation, being the facilitator, bringing you this content, and almost creating a framework that allows us to sort of break it and bring in different bits and pieces. And there was a few things in here that resonated. We really loved like this bottom right motion here, like just feeling a bit like crude and broken, and not too slick, which was obviously something we felt like Dave needed to have anyway. This second direction was looking at them almost being like the writer's room and bringing some of the, the process from writing this content, the original content that they do, into the creative. So like, could we create this quite collagic process? Like, could it feel quite mixed media, mixing sort of notes and handwriting with actual content and cutting it out? I'm not sure what the baguettes were really saying there, but it was, really kind of messy and just trying to find a way to bring through some of that, the writing and the process into the final product. This third direction was almost, if we're looking at Dave, and I think this was another thing that obviously came through in the final creative, is Dave is a person, and as a brand, how do we personify it in a way that feels interesting, that feels different? Like, how can we bring through this character of this irreverence and stuff into how we lay out, how we treat type, how we can present different bits of information in a way that feels like Dave is a person making all this content. We kind of spoke about this idea, and I think it kind of came through a lot in the end anyway, but we almost wanted the brand to feel like your mate Dave made it, like a bit shit, a bit like sort of, what's that possible line between, but then obviously pushed us into some strange territories, and uncomfortable ones too. But yeah, we really wanted it to feel like you could get an essence of Dave, even just in the sort of way we treat type. And the fourth one we looked at was just completely fresh take, taking everything Joanna spoke about at the beginning there of what you know of Dave, maybe Jeremy Clarkson and that sort of stuff, and just completely flipping it, going in a different direction, and how would that feel? And I think it helped to really sort of break away a little bit, even though obviously it helped us to work out what made Dave Dave. And a lot of that is, the sense of black coming through and a sort of darker nature to it, not too colorful. That isn't Dave. So it really helped us to work some of that kind of content out, which was really good. So yeah, we had these 4 creative sort of territories, we call these, which obviously really draft and sort of just work in progress that we shared with them. And then we move into like a quite typical process. We'll do like a sort of first sprint where we'll actually define some different routes. So these were quite fun. So I'm quite glad we're getting to share some of this, because it just lives in a, it's just in a folder, never to be seen again otherwise. But so yeah, we had these 3 routes that we shared with the guys. The first one was looking at Davis being like almost this scrapbook of life. Something they really liked in the pitch was that sort of messy, collagic kind of feel, tactility being something as well. We tried to bring that into the brand, like how we could almost use a mix of, tickets to shows, to objects, to posters type, all kind of building up in different ways. Trying to bring that into the channel, into content, not just sort of into the campaign as well. And how that could almost feel quite messy. How could we treat type in a way that's almost feels systemized, but like allows for these imperfections, bringing through like photocopy textures and ripped paper. And it felt really fun. I think, there was obviously feedback around it. Sort of, we got this sort of chalkboard as well, which everyone kind of recognized from Dave. It felt really fun, but it almost felt like it needed to be modernized a little bit. It was a little bit too rooted in paper and cutouts, where obviously how we live today and how Dave operates is predominantly digitally. So, how can we bring a sense of that through? But yeah, it felt really fun, and loved some of the stuff we were sort of creating here. The second one, which I think is a lot of what actually informed the final brand as well, is this idea of the imperfect mind, Dave's imperfect process and day-to-day life, celebrating mistakes and flaws. And then this was, on that second territory I was sharing about how we could almost capture the essence of a person behind it. Would we have lots of different typefaces which can be expressed in different ways to show like how Dave might be feeling, excited to more solemn and more empathetic at different times as well. How we could be really expressive at type, really playful. We really thought this idea of maybe could we create a bunch of different typefaces that all have a sort of hand-rendered quality for Dave, for the different moods that he potentially has. Could we bring in icons into this as well? So it all has a sort of a hand-rendered feel, but almost more characterful than anything. And the learnings of this, I think, were as much as we like the expression and the kind of humanistic feel of it, we needed to create a typeface that worked really hard for us, that they would be able to create content really quickly with. So we couldn't be using, hand rendered typefaces for everything. But it felt really fun, and it captured the essence of Dave. You can see, obviously, at this point as well, we're going very black and white because that just felt right for Dave. But it actually, in the end, was maybe a bit too black and white here at this point. And then the third one, which was going off on a completely different tangent, was this idea of looking at Dave's stream of consciousness. And so we kind of, the way we brought this to life was almost imagining, the way that Dave might have these different things pop up in their head constantly throughout the day, like an thought, an idea, a quote from a show they watched last night, or, objects that they've seen around in the day. Like, how could we build a world of all these ingredients that could kind of bake in that almost feels like as sporadic and kind of eclectic as the person's mind throughout the day. And we kind of thought about a system for how we could hold all these together as well. So even in sort of these end cards, could you have a mix of the show name, a quote from the show, or an object from the show? Could we start to play with the imagery as well? So we had quite a systemized framework for this kind of mess that we were including. And what we were actually trying to do here as well is actually just use really sort of everyday items as well. So we were just using sort of Times New Roman and Helvetica, obviously. I think it might be even Arial, actually. A little bit more of it.
It was especially crude. Yeah.
And yeah, we went down and I was absolutely loving it, to be fair, at one point. And then I think we shared it with them, and they were like, it maybe just goes a little bit too shit. Like, it just maybe looks a little bit like, would anybody even recognize that it's been actually considered, or have we gone too far? And so maybe we've got to push those limits sometimes and see where we can take it. But yeah, it felt really fun, and we were thinking about how you could combine some of these elements together, like people's faces with these objects, almost create a narrative with some of these random layouts. And yeah, we really obviously lost all the layout sense in these ones and just kind of played with whatever stuck. So those are the sort of three directions we first went into, and there was ingredients within there that felt like they were really resonating. They had the seeds of something interesting, but they weren't quite there yet. But this idea of everydayness, the sort of what we experience every day, like the imperfect nature of every day, like what happens, the awkwardness of life, really felt like some rich territory for us to play into, and sort of very fertile ground. It felt like it opened up a lot of different avenues, and it also just really felt right for Dave. Some of the things we were looking at within here were, this idea of an everyday nature to the tone of typography, like how we could capture those different moods of Dave. We played with, whether we did those just with really standard typefaces, or how we could capture it in our own typefaces that we might create. We had these textures as well, which we thought about bringing in from shows or from what Dave sees every single day. And we thought about, even sort of message chats and all this sort of stuff, and layout that can all sort of feel and start to build this picture of a very kind of crude and sort of imperfect design system that we started to build into. That these were the things that were really resonating with them. So then we started to sort of unpack some of these and build into them and sort of explore what these ingredients could be. So the first thing we were really looking at was, like, how can we actually define this typeface or this approach to layout that feels imperfect? It kind of feels a bit like we've thrown it onto the page, but also with a sense of a system there too, because obviously we can't just, there needed to be some rules that we couldn't just sort of throw every single layout you do is totally different. We wanted to capture this sort of humanistic feel to everything, but also be able to use maybe one typeface. And we started to define this in different ways, like how many weights do we want to mix, like to get nerdy on it. Obviously, we just felt like maybe just mixing one or two weights within the family, so like semi-bold and medium, close enough so that it feels almost like enunciation in the voice. So like almost like Dave or an audience member is saying it. So you can just get these slight variations rather than it actually being like a big jump between weights. So it actually just feels like a bit of a mistake or a bit of like expression, if you will. And then how this might also work with the word mark as well, like Dave will go back to that in a second, but yeah, how it could almost work as a system, like this kind of imperfect spoken type. We played with how we could use that in color too, and yeah, this was something it started to feel a little bit like it wasn't Dave enough, like we lost that essence of black and white, which they really liked. And so this wasn't something that made it through in the end, but we thought it could obviously work like that. And then, yeah, to go back to that system as well, we wanted it to feel like these layouts were messy and had this imperfect nature to them, but there needed to be something behind there. So we started to devise this sort of system of, you know, maybe there's 2 or 3 angles in every layout, including the image, the logo, and the way we treat type. Like, and maybe those angles can only ever be like 0.5, 1, 1.5. So there's slight variations that make this kind of messy feel, but actually behind it there is some rigor. And then this idea of the everyday textures as well was, we pitched it as being something that Dave sees or an audience member sees every day. So things they may come across or things they witness on their way to work or throughout the whole day. We wanted these to feel really representative of what someone might see, but also just really representative of England, of Britain. You know, Dave's a British TV show, and we wanted it to feel like a modern representation of it. And how what feels like the most every day. And you know, the beans was the one we showed them first, and they were just like, the beans, it's so Dave, like, and so we were trying to build on that all the time, like what these sort of quirks that we could see around us every day that could be quite funny to play with for backgrounds. And we split these into 2 groupings so that they would almost have a way of using them throughout the year. So day to day, like what Dave might see in the, you know, in the supermarket, or if they're looking for music, or in the office, but then also these topical ones as well. So for events throughout the year that Dave may want to actually create some content for, they've also got a way of approaching those. So like Wimbledon or Pride or holidays, bank holidays, or I think the dog one was the Golden Jubilee.
Yeah,
corgi. But yeah, so it's like a system that they could approach to the whole year, and different ways of always having something to respond to what's going on. And then we started to build out a system for how we could actually use these as well, whether they, you know, work as a split device or as a full bleed background, or in this lozenge device as well. So we really, obviously some of them are quite busy as well, so they couldn't always be used as a background. So we really needed a way to sort of handle them within the brand. And so we kind of arrived at this sort of lozenge system whereby we'd either use them as a background, use them split, and then you can start to see how that lozenge device works for us in different ways there as well. And then the motion as well. So yeah, through every single asset in the brand, we wanted to try and find a way to bring a sense of the everyday into it. So motion was something we really put time into exploring, how we can define some everyday motion. So we started off very simply, it was like, what are some just very simple motions that feel very everyday? So like something sliding through a letterbox, something shuffling in, does that feel quite Dave because it feels quite imperfect? Swinging like a sign or glide, or something opening. So really simple mechanisms for way things could open, the reference of everyday motion. But then we almost got a little bit more specific as well. So we're actually, you know, with the logo, working out ways that we could bring in motions from every day. So like someone typing their name, or Dave typing his name incorrectly, the windscreen wipers, or like a sticker or a text message popping up from Dave. So these almost, we actually kind of did these as an actual exploration of how Dave could move. But then in the end, we actually use these as stings within the channel. So you think that you can see these now on Dave, is actually, they just work as end frames or as openings as well. And then we started to work out how these could work with content too. So could you, like the roller blind, open up into content, or, you know, a knocking, very crude logo, like opening a door. Like we really liked how like almost basic and crude that felt, to just feel very Dave, and a little bit like we were playing with like the curves in the animation, and at times it just felt so slick. We were like, this doesn't feel Dave. It needs to feel a bit like a keynote transition or something sometimes, like a bit like slapstick and awkward. And then how these might also work with content. So you can see the way that, say, that top left one for suits is maybe being printed out, or like Travel Man feels like the luggage in a travelator, or the beans is popping up like in bread in a toaster. So they're very subtle ways of bringing them in that also relate to the content you're showing. And then we also needed to look within the channel itself. You know, there's a very tight system for what you can do on OSP channels. So we had to try and come up with some ways for some simple things we could do that feel every day. Like we had, you know, these little pop-up devices, or someone getting the how many days to go for the show, or the show name incorrect could just feel very Dave, that other channels couldn't get away with, to almost like this big police tape, like we like down the bottom, that felt quite everyday, to just, you know, very irreverently go over the top of content could be really fun too. And again, just, yeah, like building in that idea of these sort of mistakes or imperfect nature that only Dave could maybe get away with, that actually other channels, you know, almost too slick to be able to do. So then we kind of devised this sort of system from all these different things we were playing with, and how we could bring them all together to work for the channel. So in the end, it kind of resolved something to having like this expressive type. Like sometimes we just use type, sometimes we use type and image in this lozenge device, the split device too, and then also bringing in these textures. So like these would work for promos specifically. And then you can see how, whether it's for social feed or for stories, these same type and image, or split or texture and lozenge, all start to define some of these messy elements into a system that really works quite hard. And you can see them all here playing out. So this, we gave us a system to Dave. So we worked very much indicatively and notionally for them to devise a system that they then took and actually brought onto screen themselves. So then the final system, just to get into what everyone's probably seen now, I guess, in the case study, but yeah, the way it resolved was, obviously we had to lead with the beans, because the client just loved the beans. And so we actually, the amount of time we spent trying to get the beans right, to just feel everyday enough but not feel really greasy, was actually a lot of work. But yeah, so then, and we haven't actually spoken about the logo yet, but I'll get to that in a second. And yeah, the sort of final concept was playing with the idea of everyday, the celebrating the everyday, subverting the everyday, and playing with the world we see around us. And that just felt really right for Dave. So then, as part of this everyday system, in the end, yeah, we worked with this lozenge device and how we could use it to hold our imperfect type in different ways. We devised a system for, as we showed a little bit before, how we could actually make it feel messy, but actually have a system beneath. So we worked out the exact angles that felt right for Dave, the amount for any layout that we use. And then it always just has this sense of being imperfect, but actually, if you handed it over to someone tomorrow, they'd know what makes the Dave layout Dave. We played a lot with copy as well, and yeah, we wanted to bring this irreverence and kind of mistakes and imperfect nature into all the copy. And yeah, we really liked this final line we arrived at, which felt very Dave is funny and just mostly on purpose. And so I just felt really good for those guys. Yeah, the logo actually was an interesting one. We played, as you saw in some of the pitch, and then some of the creative exploration as well. We really played with what the logo could be, but in the end, it was decided by Dave that they didn't want to change the actual word themselves, which we felt was the right decision, but we could contain it in some way. So we decided to put it into a box, but we couldn't just be perfectly in a box, because that wouldn't feel very Dave. So we actually offset it into the corner, which felt really uncomfortable. But we gave it some systems, so it's like a quarter in the top left, a third in the bottom. So there is some thinking there. There isn't just placed randomly in the box. But it just felt it couldn't just be perfectly contained, because that just wouldn't be Dave. So yeah, that's where we got to with it. And you can use it at multiple angles, but that's also quite set as well. And the typeface we arrived at was something that felt like it would allow us to have all these different tones within it, but like slight variations rather than mixing sort of like extremes of the weights. And then how we brought these to life as well, like how we could start to work with some of those textures every day, like how we could talk about the Women's World Cup, or more specifically around particular shows or topical things like bank holidays. They can start to bring in these everyday textures in different ways. We had these lozenges from everyday language. So this was something which we introduced as well, which almost gave us lots of different ways to treat content for social, but also for all sorts of bits of content. So it was almost taking the sort of language you see in every day, like from flyers or from, you know, street signs or anything really, and how we could sort of repurpose it or subvert it to be used for the Dave brand. So they start to become almost like little bits of language you can start to use in different ways. And I think, and then, yeah, I will go back to those, but then we got to this sort of very hard working guideline in the end as well. So obviously all this mess and chaos that was, we wanted it to feel like actually had to have a bit of rigor behind it, well, a lot of rigor behind it in the end, so that the guys could actually implement it and continue to implement it for a long time to come. And so I think that was what was also really interesting about it, was that this was day one of it, but really in a few years' time, it can continue to be flexible and evolve, but within the same sort of framework that we gave them, it still feel very Dave, and give them lots of things to do as they need to create content every single day. We looked at the channel. We helped them a lot with sort of stings and some of the idents as well. So some of those some of the motion tests we did for the logo really came into the final product as well. So you can see, you can hear, I think, a little bit how we brought these to life as well. Just felt really fun capturing that irreverence of Dave. We gave them a bit more of an inspiration guide around the TV channel. So we gave them lots of different things that they could do, referencing sort of everyday motion, like the messages popping up. And we gave them loads here that they could use. And they sort of took it into a really a tighter system from there. But we kind of set how that could actually work. How could you create this imperfect feel, but like when it's being pulled through a template on screen where every single show name has to come in on a system, how could we still create that kind of imperfect nature? So it's almost using each word with a different typesetting or each line with a different typesetting, so that you can still create that kind of imperfect nature. And then also how that went into social too. So obviously moving beyond just the TV screen, Dave needed to be able to be translated easily into content too. So like how some of these devices could work for Dave. So like using the lozenge to just slap in the top left corner, and a way of owning and handling subtitles too. It just feels very Dave as well, just putting it in a crude box. And then it just makes it feel Dave. And then this is where the sort of everyday lozenges really started to help us out as well, into sort of campaigns. So Dave needed a way to, for different shows, when they're launching a new show or they're talking about a show they already commissioned, they needed ways to be able to dial up the campaign for that particular show. So this is where the lozenges really helped them out, because we could obviously appropriate something from the show which felt right. So like for Sneakerhead, price stickers felt right, or for Just Jokes, a text message. So something picked from the show that would allow them to talk about that show in a particular way, but also just feel on brand for Dave as well. And then also ways they could actually be a bit more playful with type too. So like with Sliced, obviously a very literal way of playing with that, but just bringing that sense of ownability to make it a little bit more bespoke for that TV show, but still feeling really on brand for Dave. And then in social too, how these sort of devices can give us lots of different things to do, whether it's they have a sort of very active social feed, so it's like lots of different things they do, whether it's a joke or a partnership with Campaign for Living Miserably. So we needed to give them a really versatile system here, basically, and so these lozenge devices really helped with that. And yeah, we really explored for loads of different shows what these devices could switch up for each particular show, to give them something unique to say about each of those, like the stamp for Travelman. So it became a really flexible system, but just still had that sort of the right nature for Dave. And various different campaigns, and finally, obviously, merch, which can't go without. So I think is that all? I think
yeah.
So yeah, that's quite a lot of slides we got through, but hopefully, yeah, we wanted to really sort of unpack the process and show some of the stupid stuff we did along the way that was just really fun to work on, and to work with the Dave team, who are really responsive and really great to work with in that way. So really nice to be able to share it with